All right. Well, I know you're excited from what I just said about a new topic we're going to cover, and let's dive right in.
Yes.
All right. Yes, I hear the excitement.
Right. Man. Morning.
Hallelujah. Pastor Norris is here. Good morning. Good to see you. I was getting worried. Okay. All right.
It's
well,
snowing in Camiguin.
All right. So we're continuing our journey looking at the connector words because those are what identify for us the phrases and clauses that we then, when we're diagramming, want to determine the word it modifies so we can place it under that word for our diagram. And so the connector words we've spent time on the last several weeks, couple months even, as coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions. And then the last couple of weeks we've been looking at prepositions and different examples. We looked at a few verses together. And I want to go back to a verse that we looked at. Before we do that, just to remind us of the 3 steps that we've been following to identify what word a prepositional phrase is modifying. And again, that first step was to make sure we have a prepositional phrase. And that is a preposition that is followed by a noun. Okay, and so that first step was to look for a noun after the preposition to confirm we had it. And then we would ask, okay, what is the word right before the preposition? Typically, that will be the word the prepositional phrase is modifying. All right, not always. As we saw in many examples, sometimes that word did not make sense to be modified by the prepositional phrase. And so we would look at the next word before it and check to see if that word made sense. And then that was essentially the steps we would do. And once we found a word that made sense, that it could be modified by the prepositional phrase, then we determined how that it was modifying it, whether it was indicating where or when or why or what kind or something like that. So those are the steps we've been following, and you can look at the previous few sessions if you want to review that. I want to go back to a verse that we had looked at. And there was a couple of prepositions here that were a little bit tricky. And so I wanted to go back to this passage and we won't go through all the steps I just mentioned, but I just want us to identify the prepositions. And then I want you to see if you can find there's 3 of them here that are a little bit tricky, and they actually are something different that we haven't discussed in detail yet. So let's just go through and we'll identify prepositions as we've been doing before, and then we'll see if we can find those unique prepositions in this passage. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with you, Pastor Allen, and I want you to take verses 14 and 15. Just identify the prepositions that you see there. Okay. And if you want to read the 2 verses first, that'd be great. And then just tell me what prepositions you see. And remember, just as you're looking, don't forget our acronym, because these are the most common. All right. So if you guys remember, at, with, in, for, from, by, on, of, and to. Remember, those are the most common. So keep that in mind as you look at this passage. Okay, Pastor Allen.
Okay, I'll read first.
Thank you.
The verses. For this reason, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. Okay. General observation. For.
Okay.
Before.
All right.
From.
Okay, good.
In heaven. In.
Yes.
And on earth.
All right, good. Any others?
I think that's it.
I think so too. And we'll just quickly check. For, what follows for is this reason I bow my knees. Okay? Because again, remember, we identify what follows the preposition by the words between each connecting word. And so we have a connecting word for, and then the next connecting word is before. So notice we have what follows for is this reason I bow my knees. Now, do you see a verb in that statement? There is, right? Bow.
Yes,
And do you
bow.
see a subject?
Yes.
Okay, so what does that tell you? Is for a preposition in this case?
I don't think so.
No, right? Because if it was, it would be. Go ahead. What would tell us it's a preposition?
I just followed our general rule, a whip boot. So I
yes, and that's
identified
fine
it for that reason.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's why we then we do a check. That's why we're doing this. So a prepositional phrase is a preposition plus a noun. Remember, a clause though contains a subject and a verb, and in this case we confirm I bow as a subject and a verb, so for cannot be a preposition. Okay, sometimes it is. In fact, it often is, but sometimes it is not, and in this case it is not. Actually, for this reason is a subordinating conjunction in this case. All right, so this was a little tricky, but because we had the steps, we were able to confirm that it was not. Okay, but you're correct. As you see the word for in a whiff boot, so that's going to be a natural, we're going to naturally identify it as a preposition, and then we need to check to make sure. Okay, the next one you had is before. Now, is that a preposition?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly, because notice what follows it is a noun.
Noun. Yeah.
All right, very good. And then from, is that a preposition? Verse 15.
Yeah.
Yes, no verbs follow it. All right. So that is a preposition. And then heaven.
Yes.
Yep, heaven's a noun.
Yes.
And then earth.
Earth also.
Earth is, now notice though, we also have this derives its name. Now that might say, well, wait a minute. Derives is a verb. So do I have a clause here? Earth derives its name. And we've seen this kind of thing before. How can we answer that question? Because it looks like we have a clause here. So that would mean on is not a preposition. But there's one thing we have to make sure here that we identify. When we find the verb, we also have to ask, what is the subject? What is the subject of derives? Is it earth or something else? What do you think, Alan?
It's family.
Yes, exactly. Very good. So it's every family derives its name, not earth derives its name. So we know that this clause or this verb and object, I'm going to do it in green, goes with this subject. Okay? Remember, we talked about this, that prepositional phrases, sometimes the author will squeeze them in between a subject and a verb because he wants to modify the subject. Because notice here, these two prepositional phrases modify family. Which family? The families in heaven and the families on earth. All right? And so in order to make sure that we understand that these prepositional phrases modify family, Paul squeeze them in between the subject and the verb. So we'll often have this, we'll have a subject, and then we'll have a prepositional phrase that modifies the subject. And then we'll have the verb. And then sometimes the object, as we do here. Okay? And we've seen that example before, but I just want to show you it happens again. And then sometimes a an author will do a subject verb, and then he'll squeeze a prepositional phrase in between the verb and the object because he wants to emphasize that it's the verb being modified. Okay? So keep that in mind. Almost very often, most of the time, when you see a prepositional phrase right after a subject, it's put there in order to modify the subject. So you have to be careful when you look at what follows the preposition to make sure that you're not tricked and that you're not thinking, oh, I see a verb here, therefore this cannot be a preposition. Well, that's sometimes true, but in this case it is not because the subject is over here, family. All right. Now, are there any questions on that? This is very common in Greek and in English. And actually, the English translation is simply following the original Greek text here. In Koine Greek, they will do the same thing. You'll see prepositional phrases squeezed between a subject and a verb because the author is modifying, is using it to modify the subject. All right, so here is just the English translation simply following what the Greek text has. Okay, so you will see this very commonly. All right, and the key is understanding where that subject and verb is located. All right, and now here on is one of our with boots, right? As is in. Okay, and so the preposition on, I don't recall that it ever functions in any other way except as a preposition in a prepositional phrase, but I have to think about that. All right, any questions so far on this? Hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully you remember from our previous discussions, this is really a review, nothing new yet, okay, but we always want to review and remind ourselves. Let's pick up in verse 16, and Selma, I'm going to ask you to do that one. Just read verse 16 and identify any prepositions that you see there.
Okay, sir. Verse 16. That he would grant you according to the riches of his glory to be strengthened with power through his spirit in the inner man. Preposition, sir, is in verse 16.
Yes, what do you see?
To, sir, to the riches, then followed by his glory.
Okay, I'm sorry, that according to, is that what you said?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
All right.
Then
Of, good.
Then followed by through.
Through, okay, good.
Yes. In the inner man, in.
Okay, good.
Okay. Another two is not a preposition.
Okay, which, what two are you talking about here?
To be strengthened, sir. It's not a
Okay,
preposition.
and
It's
how do
not,
you know that?
Because there is a verb followed by to be strengthened. Then another one, sir, is with.
Yes, okay, good. So to be strengthened is not a prepositional phrase because to is followed by a verb. Okay, good. And then, yes, you captured the others. We'll just confirm it. Let's look at according to. Okay, what follows it? Is that a noun?
Yes, sir. Right.
Okay.
Plural form.
And then again, his glory. Okay, we have a comma and then another preposition here. So we know that the next block here is his glory. Is that a noun?
I think, sir.
Yes,
Noun.
good. You're correct. So of is a preposition. And then you already talked about to be strengthened. is not a preposition, since be strengthened is a verb. So to is not a preposition there. How about with power?
Power, sir, is a noun.
Very good. Spirit.
Noun, sir.
Yep.
Also
And inner
noun.
man. The man.
Inner man.
Yep. Okay, good. And again, notice, guys, when we talk about what follows the preposition, you can often have, you'll have a prepositional phrase will have a preposition plus a noun, and sometimes it'll have plus modifiers to the noun. Okay? So for example, we have according to, and then the riches. Now, technically, the is not a noun, is it? Is the a noun? What's it called? Who can tell me? Anselmo, do you remember?
Definite article, sir.
Excellent. Man, you are an English scholar. This guy is he's on fire. So yeah.
He's on a roll, Pastor Tim. Anselmo's on a roll.
He's on a roll. Very, very good. So yes, here we have according to is our preposition, and then riches is our noun that follows the preposition, and it's called the object of the preposition, if you care to know. And then we have this word the, and that's a definite article, and that's modifying riches. Okay, which riches? The riches. Okay, another article is a or an. All right, so, and then, okay, let's look at another one. Of his glory. Of his glory. Of is what, Anselmo?
Sir, preposition, sir.
That's the preposition. And then we have glory. Well, I'll do it in order. His. What is his?
Possessive pronoun.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a pronoun,
Sir.
and
Possessive
technically
pronoun.
it's possessive. But this pronoun modifies glory.
Glory.
It's telling us which glory. Okay? So it's attached to the noun. And then the noun is, of course, glory. That's our noun. That's the object of the preposition. Okay? So when we talk about what follows the preposition, it's going to have a noun plus words that modify the noun. All right? Or we have here the in the inner man. Let's look at that one real quick. In the inner man. Okay? What is the word in, Anselmo?
Preposition, sir.
That's our preposition. And then we have the, you already identified that.
Definite article, sir.
Okay, and what is it modifying?
Followed by inner man. Inner, sir.
Okay, we have inner,
Adjective.
and then we have man. Okay, man is the noun, right?
Yes.
Ah.
Yes, sir.
And then what is inner?
It seems like adjectives to the inner man.
Yes.
The man.
It modifies the man.
Yes, sir.
Which man? Okay, and this, the article modifies man as well. Specifies the man, the inner man. So again, in this case, we have a preposition. We have a prepositional phrase. We have the preposition plus an article plus an adjective and then the noun. Okay? So that's still a prepositional phrase. What we can't, if we had this, a prepositional, if we think it's a prepositional phrase, so we have a preposition and then a verb, no, it's no longer a prepositional phrase. Okay, that's what makes it, all right? Just like you noticed, Anselmo, that one statement here, in fact, it's right here, to be strengthened. You caught that right away. That was very good. All right, so here we know that to is not a preposition because it's followed by a verb. Now, this is a special case, which we're going to talk about in a minute, okay? All right, good. Let's go to verses 17 and 18. Pastor Bobby, we'll have you take care of those. Verses 17 and 18.
Uh-huh.
Just
All
identify
right.
the prepositions for us.
Prepositions here is in, first there, through, and what else? In, love, and to comprehend, with all, and so that's, yeah, those are the obvious preposition, Pastor Tim.
Okay, good.
Uh,
And lots of conjunctions in here. All right, let's do it. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Did you have something else?
Yeah, no, those are the prepositions. At least obvious preposition, identified in the a with boot.
Yes. Yeah. In, to, and with are part of a with boot, and then we have the extra one there through. Okay. So let's just do our quick test. And we know here that that is not a preposition because we have a verb, may dwell, right? So,
yeah.
So you didn't pick that, which is good. Okay, your hearts. Is there a verb here?
I did not mention the so that and that you and but after in, Pastor Tim, we have a noun there, a pronoun.
Yep.
And a noun, a plural noun, hearts.
Yes.
And so in is functioning as a preposition to modify the previous phrase, may dwell. Okay.
Yes, talking about where.
The previous.
Good, and so we confirmed in is a preposition here, and then we can look at through. What follows through?
A noun, faith.
And then how do we know that all of this doesn't follow through?
Because of the conjunction.
Yes.
You have a conjunction there, which is a coordinating conjunction.
Exactly. So it tells us that's where we know that it's a connector word and it's connecting another, in that case, clause. So, but here, faith goes with through. So through faith is our prepositional phrase. Faith is a noun. Okay, and that you being rooted and grounded in love.
Okay, in love is also a prepositional phrase because it is followed by a noun.
Yes.
Okay,
all right.
So,
and notice here, sorry to interrupt you, but notice again, we talked about, do you see the subject and verb split? We have another example of that here. You may be able. That's my subject and verb. And then we have this thing sandwiched in between, being rooted and grounded in love. Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to point that out. Okay. The next one you had is to.
To, and then it is followed by a verb, comprehend.
So is it a prepositional phrase?
So it's not a prepositional phrase, considering the next word is a verb, an action word, to comprehend.
Okay, so this is not a prepositional phrase. All right, even though it starts with that word to, which is one of a whiff boot. So we again have this sort of unique situation where we have a preposition followed by a verb, the preposition to. So we'll cover that in a minute. Okay, with all the saints.
All the saints is a prepositional phrase, Pastor Tim, because it is followed by plural form of the all the saints is considered a noun.
Yeah, saints is the noun, all and the modify saints. Okay, now why can't we say all of this? Because the next connector word's here, right? That's a conjunction. Why can't we say all the saints with what is the breath? Why can't we say that's all the what follows with? How do we know it's just all the saints?
Because it what is the breath is functioning like a modifier for maybe able to comprehend.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the nearest in proximity.
Okay,
to comprehend,
good.
functioning as like an infinitive.
Yeah, we have here an example I mentioned before where in this case, what is the breath? Breath is the object of the verb. So we have a preposition squeezed in here. So for example, you, here's how I would diagram, being rooted and grounded in love. Okay, what's the rest of my... And then we have the verb, may be able to comprehend. And then with all the saints. And then we have the object, comprehend what? What is the breadth? And then we have the rest of these.
A conjunction that is coordinating length.
Yes, exactly. So notice this. Here we have a situation. Okay, you is my subject. May be able is the verb. Okay, so this, I'm going to highlight in green the main clause here. You, if I can. You may be able to comprehend what is the breadth. Okay, so you, this is my subject.
Verb
May be able to comprehend my verb, verbal phrase. And then what is the breadth is actually the object. All right.
I was about to ask Pastor Tim a while back, but you already wrote there. Can we not consider maybe able to comprehend as a whole verb? Or as you mentioned, as you put there, a verbal phrase.
Yeah, because you may be able, if it was just you may be able, what is the breadth? Doesn't make sense. May be able requires an additional verb to complete the idea. So yeah, this is kind of a little bit complex, but it's basically all of this is verb, one verbal phrase. But I want you guys to notice, do you see how again
Transitive verb.
Yeah, this is be able is intransitive, yeah. But notice again
Transitive
how the author has inserted these phrases between the subject, the verb, and in this case also the object.
Yeah.
Okay? And he's doing that because he wants to make sure we correctly identify what's being modified here. So he wants to make sure we understand these modify the subject. Okay? Because he put them in right after the subject and before the verb. If he had put this in down here, if he had said, you may be able to comprehend being rooted and grounded in love with all the saints, then we would think, oh, well, this must go with the verb. But that's not what he did. He put being rooted and grounded in love, he put that between the subject and the verb. And then he does the same kind of thing between the verb and the object, where he says, you may be able to comprehend with all the saints. He wants to make sure we understand that with all the saints goes with this verbal phrase. It's modifying it. Okay? And we know that for certain, again, because he inserts that prepositional phrase. Okay, this is as Pastor Bobby correctly identified, this is a prepositional phrase. All right, because it's got the preposition with, it's followed by the noun saints, and then these two little modifier words. So this prepositional phrase is intended by the author to modify what comes right before it, because he's inserted it between the verb and the object. So like I mentioned to you before, here we have a subject plus, in this case, a participle phrase plus a prepositional phrase. Then we have the verb. Then we have the a prepositional phrase. And then we have the object. So this is a rather complex sentence. In one way, it's complex because he's squeezing in. So you really have to pay attention and ask yourself, okay, what is the subject, verb, and object here? And then you can identify, okay, I have these phrases here, I have this phrase here, and then the object. All right, so this is
Pastor Tim,
yes.
I'm sorry if I
That's
may
okay.
interrupt. So what I've been learning from our lesson that I added to my ability to be able to comprehend a verse or a passage is it has been very helpful to be able to identify the sentence construction and the grammar, identifying the part of speech in detail as you have taught us, okay? And I began to realize that in order to understand what the author, the original intent of the author is trying to make, is to be able to step back now from looking at it so close in detail, to step back now and look at it from a larger sense, to be able to bring out the sense of it, okay? To be able to bring out the sense of it. Step back, okay? After identifying those details, step back now and get the sense. Get the sense, what makes sense, okay? So I got that from you. What makes sense of what he is saying? So that's what I've learned from here now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's the challenge with diagramming, is sometimes you get stuck in the details and you need to step back and look at the bigger picture a little bit. So you go back and forth, all right? And that's why diagramming is, it's challenging, because you have to understand a lot of things that go into. I mean, just look at the connector words, how long we've been spending talking about those. But my hope is that, as we look at these examples, that you can begin to know what to look for, okay?
Pastor Tim, if I may add also, the second thing that I have learned from here, from our lesson, is I I am not my dependency on commentaries has no, been helped significantly in such that I am not now left no to be dependent on what the Bible commentators say. I now have the uh, ability to be able to agree or disagree, unlike before that I will just have to depend on the credibility of the commentator. But right now, I have a means now to agree or slightly disagree, not totally disagree, perhaps, but most of the time to slightly disagree. I now have that uh, ability to be able to do that.
Yeah, and
Yes.
that's sort of the point, is being able to interact with the commentator. So when they say something, you at least understand what they're saying, and you can say, well, that doesn't make sense here because there's a verb here, or okay, yeah, that makes sense because I can see the verb here, or whatever it is. I remember I got a phone call one time when I was in the office, and some guy's calling, and he was asking about you know, the Trinity. You know, he's asking about, you know, do I believe Jesus is God? And so he was trying to argue against that. But at first he was just being very nice and, you know, trying to be tricky. But then I just told him, you know, because he was trying to say Jesus was, you know, is the Son of God. He's his son. He has to be created. And so then I tried to, he brought up a passage, you know, in Colossians, he's the firstborn of creation. So he said, see, firstborn, he's created, he's birthed, you know. And I said, well, that word firstborn is prototokos, and it means that he receives the rights of a firstborn. It doesn't mean he was born, it means he is preeminent. And he said, no, it doesn't mean that. You know, he's trying to argue, but I know what the word means in Greek. And so because I know that, he doesn't have an argument. You know, and so that's the importance of, if you understand, you know, these prepositions and how they work, and you see how they're functioning in the sentence, that gives you an understanding that, you know, if someone were to say something that was incorrect, you at least have information and knowledge now to be able to agree or disagree, as Pastor Bobby said. And so, yeah, a lot of things you can find on your own if you just understand the grammar, understand diagramming. You'll be able to pull out a lot of things on your own. Like we talked about before, once you have the diagram, you can see how it's structured, and you can see, in this case, for example, if we were to connect verses 16 and 17 here, I'll do that in a minute. Let's finish up. I want to get to the, unless, did you have anything else to add to that, Pastor Bobby? I think that's a helpful point. Let's do this last verse. Okay, thank you. Let me ask Sir Sid on this one. Take verse 19, if you don't mind. Just identify the prepositions. Walk us through it.
And to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled up to all the fullness of God. Preposition of Christ, then of God, then to all the fullness.
Okay, two.
That's all.
Okay. What about this two?
It has a verb following it.
Very
That's the
good.
know.
Yes, exactly. To know. So know is a verb. So
And
Okay,
The
go
up
ahead.
after the field is not a preposition because it's an adverb. It's an adverb, an idiom connected
Okay,
to the
where,
verb
oh,
filled.
up. Yes, good. Very good. May be filled up. That's actually one verbal idea. So up here is not a preposition either. It does not introduce a prepositional phrase. The word is a preposition, but it's not a prepositional phrase. It's part of this verb. Maybe filled up. Okay, good. To is followed by,
Fullness, a noun.
yep, in and of God. Okay, so again, notice we have this, we've got these 3 times in this passage. Did you guys notice that this preposition to, and then followed by a verb? All right, and somebody said this earlier. I think it may have been Michael. I can't remember who.
Yeah.
These particular phrases here are actually a special class of words that uses the preposition to, and it's followed by a verb. All right. And Michael, what are those called?
Intransitive.
Infinitives.
Intransitive.
Infinitive verb.
Well, the verbs,
Transitive verb.
the verbs in these cases, to comprehend and know are transitive verbs, but you used another term that starts with an I.
That's infinitives.
Yes, infinitives. All right. So whenever you have
That's
to,
verbal.
what's that?
Verbals. Verbals.
Yes. All right. These are a special class of verbals. So I'll explain in a minute, where you have the word to, and it's always almost always structured this way. You have the preposition to, but in this case, it's followed by a verb, and that's called an infinitive, where the words go together. To know, to comprehend, to be strengthened. Those go together, but they're not a prepositional phrase. If they were, remember, you'd have to have the noun following to, okay? But in this case, we don't have a noun. Strengthened, comprehend, know, those are all verbs. Okay? And in this case, it's referred to as an infinitive. Now, Greek has this, and this is why I'm discussing it, all right? Because it's not just an English term, it's actually a Greek part of speech as well, and fairly common in Greek, actually. Look at this phrase. We had within these 6 verses 3 infinitives, all right? So I want to talk about this for a minute, because you're going to encounter these quite often, and they can be a little confusing if you're not careful. All right, now, as I showed you, we have a way to identify, is this a prepositional phrase or an infinitive? All I need to do is look for the verb. All right, so in this case, you have an infinitive, and the infinitives in English and in Greek are the preposition to followed by a verb. Now, as Sir Sid mentioned, the preposition is part of a class of words called verbals. Now, I want to make sure it's clear. And the infinitive is not a connector word. All right? It doesn't function that way. It doesn't function like a preposition does for a prepositional phrase. It doesn't function like a conjunction. They don't connect phrases and clauses. They are part of a phrase or a clause. All right? And these infinitives are called verbals. All right? There's 3 kinds of verbals in English. There's the participles, which we haven't covered yet in detail. And that is where you have a verb plus an ing or ed ending. I went to the store walking all the way. Now, it's called a verbal because it has a verb in it, but it doesn't act like a verb. Right? Don't you love English? All right, so we see the verb here, walking, but it's not acting like a verb. This is acting like an adverb here, actually. It's modifying went. All right. So that's one class. And again, we're going to cover participles in detail in a couple of weeks, Lord willing. But that is a form of a verbal. Again, a verbal is words that are formed from a verb but don't act like a verb. Okay. In other words, that means it doesn't necessarily describe the action of a subject, because notice in this case, there is the verb, this verbal has no subject directly. All right. The subject is indirectly I, but it's not I walking all the way. It's I went to the store. How did I go to the store? Walking all the way. Okay. It's an adverb. It's modifying a verb here. The verb is walking.
And it is a passive voice, Pastor Tim.
This is, here it's an active voice, walking. Be walking would be passive. For example, up here, Michael, to be strengthened, that's passive.
Okay.
Okay, so there is a passive infinitive. These are active voice, but yes, this case, to be strengthened, that means being strengthened by something else. All right, I'm not strengthening myself, I'm being strengthened. Okay, so participles are a verbal. A gerund is another verbal, and it's basically a verb plus an ing ending that functions like a noun. Participle is a verb plus ing ending that functions like an adjective or a verb. But a gerund is different, and we're not really going to cover gerunds. We don't see gerunds in Greek, so we're not going to worry too much about this. I'm just letting you know so you have a complete picture. There are three verbals: participles, gerunds, and infinitives. All right, this is in English. Let me specify. In Greek, all right, in Greek, we would just be talking about these two. All right, but I'm just giving you a full picture. So in English, we have another kind of verbal called a gerund, and that is a verb that's the verb plus ing ending that acts like a noun. In this case, walking to the store is the subject of the sentence. And subjects are nouns. So this walking is functioning like a noun in this case. All right. Whereas here, walking is functioning like an adverb because it is modifying a verb. Okay. Now, the last case is the infinitive. And notice again, I want to walk. Now, what's interesting in this sentence is notice there's a to walk, that's an infinitive, and then there's to the store. That's a prepositional phrase. So we got both uses in one sentence here. Okay. Now we know, how do we know that this to is a preposition?
It has a noun after it.
Exactly.
Before
See the noun? Store.
It's followed by a noun.
But this to is not followed by a noun. See that? Followed by a verb. So what we have in this sentence is a subject, a verb, an infinitive, and a prepositional phrase. All right. Let's put these in for. Okay, you guys see that? And the way we know the difference is, again, to here is a preposition because it's followed by the noun store. This to, the first to, is an infinitive. It's followed by a verb. All right. Any questions on identifying an infinitive?
Sir, can I permission to talk, sir?
Yes.
Since three infinitives that we found on that paragraph are modifier of a certain verb, where is our main verb here?
Ah,
We need to go to verse 14 to find a main verb. Since it is a modifier of what I think, sir, the infinitives.
yes. Very good question. So
So we need to
go ahead.
we need to look for the main verb.
Yes, and remember. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
We need to go back to above verse 14.
Yes. What's the main verb?
Thank you, sir.
What's the main verb?
I think we start, for this reason, I bow my knees to the Father.
Yes. Okay, here, we'll just, okay, for this reason is a subordinating conjunction. I bow my knees. There's my main clause right here. All right. Subject I, verb bow, and then my knees is the object. Okay. Remember, actually, when we do diagramming, remember the first step is identify the main clause. Then the second step is identify the phrases and clauses by looking for connector words. All right. So normally, we would have identified first the main clause, which is I bow my knees. And then we have prepositional phrase before the Father, telling us where. Where do I bow? All right. And then from whom? That's modifying Father. Every family, and we already looked at this. Which family? Family in heaven and on earth. Okay. And then we noticed again, derives its name. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Lost the signal there. Okay, every family, again, remember, we identified the subject of derives was family. Okay, derives its name. Okay, now we're at this verse 16.
Can you
Oh, share it.
turn
I'm
on-
sorry. Yeah, that cut off, didn't it? Oh, let me check here. Hold on a second. Okay, we're still recording. All right. Thank you, Michael. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. What we're doing here is just trying to answer Anselmo's question. And so in this case, let me squeeze this down. Okay. I bow my knees where before the Father, from whom, okay, who, which Father, in heaven, from every family. Again, that's describing which family derives its name. Okay, that's the subject is family, derives its name. And then I bow my knees. Why?
Hello.
That he would grant you. How? According to the riches, which riches of his glory, that he would grant you. And here we go, Anselmo. The first one is an object, that he would grant you what? Because notice we have a subject, he, a verb would grant you, but what would he grant you? And that's what Paul says. The answer is he would grant you this, to be strengthened. It's the object of the verb grant. He would grant You to be strengthened. How? With power. Also how? Through his Spirit. And then where? In the inner man. Okay, so all of these modify to be strengthened. And then we have so that. That's a subordinating conjunction. It's telling us why. Why to be strengthened? So that Christ may dwell in your hearts. That's where. Through faith. That's how. Okay. Now, and this is actually an excellent. I'm glad you brought this up, Anselmo, because this helps you. Again, I'm combining all the steps now rapidly to show you the diagram, because this is where, again, I want you to see the power of this. Because notice now, he would grant you to be strengthened. And then he's got all these modifiers of strengthened. How to be strengthened? With power. And again, how to be strengthened? What are the means? Through his Spirit. Where to be strengthened? In the inner man. Why to be strengthened? So that Christ may dwell in your hearts. Or Christ may dwell. Where? In your hearts. Through faith is how. And then we come to this coordinating conjunction. Now remember, what does a coordinating conjunction do? It joins two grammatically equal statements. So now I'm looking for a grammatically equal statement to be joining here. All right? And that's you, okay. Notice the other previous you is up here. That you, and we have these modifiers that I mentioned earlier. Being rooted, let me just put these here and then I'll explain it in a second. Being rooted and grounded in love. Now, remember we talked about this before? May be able to is the verb and the subject is you. We already talked about this a moment ago. All right. You may be able to comprehend. That was that verbal phrase we discussed. And then this is with all the saints. And then remember, what is the breadth? That was the object. Okay. Okay, so again, we're connecting. You may be able. What is the breadth? Okay, I'm going to need to, sorry, I'm going to have to squeeze the font down a little more. It's getting harder here. I hope you can see this. Can you guys see this, or is it too small? Is it okay?
Permission to talk again, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I found out that on the diagram that to be strengthened, the principle of proximity, this word highlight, he would grant you. Thank you, sir. I found out in your diagram.
Okay, good. I want to finish it because there's a very important connection here I want you guys to see. All right. I bow my knees. Okay, let me just clean this up a little bit. Grant according to the riches, you to be strengthened. All right, so that's the first thing. We grant you to be strengthened. Wish I could do this faster. I'm sorry, guys. To be strengthened. Remember, he had all these with power through his Spirit in the inner man, so that Christ may dwell. Okay, and then we had this and that. So he's going to ask now, he's granting you a second thing. And that you, being rooted, grounded, how in love. Okay, now we're back to it. May be able to comprehend all the saints. All right. Then we have all these coordinating conjunctions here, connecting what is the breadth and length and height. Oh, these take a long time. Okay. And now we're back to the third infinitive. And so I'm going, where does this go? Well, I got to look for let me just finish it and I'll come back. Okay. I hope you can see this. Here's the whole diagram. I want you to notice something, that that he would grant you to be strengthened, and that you may be able to comprehend and to know the love of God, love of Christ. What he does here, what Paul's doing, is he's connecting these three infinitives. These are the three results of what he's asking for God to grant. These are the three parts of his prayer that he's asking to grant three things. One, to be strengthened. Two, to comprehend. And three, to know. You see that? That's what I believe is the overall structure here of this. I bow my knees, and this is what I'm asking for. I bow my knees for this purpose, that he would grant you to be strengthened, and that he would grant you to be able to comprehend, and that he would grant you to know the love of Christ. You have a very clear outline here, I believe, in this, where you have here, this is the act of prayer, and then this is the content of his prayer. And it's basically these three things: to be strengthened, to comprehend, and to know. And then you have to figure out, okay, all the details in between each of those. But I think basically we have 1, 2, and 3. Points. All right, this is just a quick and dirty summary, but I just want you to see where we're going here. And again, the importance and the power of these diagrams is it helps us just by applying the rules of grammar and separating out the phrases and clauses and looking for those main, as Anselmo just pointed out, we're looking for those key clauses of which the prepositions and other clauses are modifying. All right, and those key clauses are, I bow my knees that he would grant you to be strengthened and that you may be able to comprehend and to know the love of Christ. All right, there's your key actions in this, key verbs or verbals in this verse. All right, the overarching main clause is it's prayer. For this reason, I bow my knees. That's the main statement. And actually, it should be here. I bow my knees. And then verses 16 to 19 is the content of his prayer. And there's really three things that he's asking, at least as I see this text. To be strengthened, to comprehend, and to know. That you be strengthened, that you comprehend, and that you be able to know the love of Christ. All right. Technically, we would put this under here, may be able to comprehend and to know, but it's part of the same, it shares the same subject. You may be able to comprehend, you may be able to know the love of God, love of Christ. Okay, I just covered, I just put a lot of information there together and did this kind of quickly. I hope that you're able to follow this. I hope I'm not too confusing, but please ask questions.
That, Pastor Tim, that's one of our passage support for our first priority in the Christian life. The 4 things I mentioned last time.
Yeah, I remember that. Yes.
To know Christ. So this is one of our support passage, Pastor Tim. To know Christ intimately and experientially.
Yeah,
But,
this is, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Pastor Tim. But not, as you pointed out, there is a great portion of passivity on our part, because this is something that for the most part God is doing to us through the Holy Spirit. And yet Paul prays for us regarding this. Yes, Pastor Tim, that's just my point.
Yeah, this is I think an excellent model prayer as Paul expresses it. Again, remember where he expresses it in the letter is at the end of his section when he talks about what God has done in our salvation. And then he ends that section with this prayer.
Yeah.
And then it's very important. And we see that it's right before he begins the next major section in the letter. Remember where he says, therefore I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of your calling. And then it's all these commands in the last 3 chapters. And so this prayer is sandwiched right between what God has done in our salvation and how we should respond.
Yeah.
And so this prayer is kind of the link between the two. All this that he's talked about in our salvation and what God has done, then he prays this prayer. For this reason, I think goes back to the entire chapters 1 to 3. For this reason, I'm praying, I bow my knees before the Father, and this is what I'm asking him. And you could really summarize it like this. I bow my knees, and he uses the word that, but it's basically what he's praying. He would grant you, and then he says, to be strengthened And then he says, and he's just continuing. The idea is, and you may be able to comprehend the love of Christ.
Comprehend.
Sorry, what is the breadth?
Katalambano.
And then he says, and then implied, he doesn't, you may be able to know the love of Christ. I should put this here. Okay, I'm skipping all the other phrases and clauses. I just took them out here so you could see the structure. Okay? This is what the diagram is supposed to help you do. Because now you can sift through. You got lots of phrases and clauses in here. What's the focus here? What's the structure here? And there's a lot of places you could go. You could just start preaching a sermon on bowing your knees. Right? That this is how we're supposed to pray. We're supposed to bow our knees, and if you're standing up praying, or if you're opening your eyes praying, you're in sin, brother. You need to be bowing your knees. Right? And praise God. Can I get an amen? Right? And that's not what he's doing here. This is not a lesson on the posture of prayer. This is simply an idiom where he's saying, I'm praying. And the important thing is, what is he praying? After all that he has said about God's work in our salvation, the work of the Father in choosing, the work of the Son in redeeming, the work of the Spirit in sealing. And then in chapter 2, he talks about we were dead in our trespasses, but God made us alive. And then later in chapter 2, he says we were separate as Gentiles from the people of God, but he brought us together and made us into one new man. And then Paul says, for this reason, I'm praying. What are you praying, Paul? And you have to understand and see the structure. He's praying these three things. Be strengthened, comprehend, to know. Okay? Now, all these other phrases and clauses in here are important, of course. But they're modifying, in some way, these three statements. Okay? This is what...
Considering Pastor, the context of the chapter, the beginning of chapter 3 is Paul revealing his role as administrator in the administration of God in chapter 3. No?
Yeah, that's right. He has a verses 2 through 13 is really a side point that he makes, because he begins, in verse 1 of chapter 3, he says, for this reason, I, Paul, prisoner of Christ Jesus, for the sake of you Gentiles, if indeed you've heard, and he goes off, when he says, I, Paul, the prisoner, that something clicks in his mind. And what clicks is that the fact he's a prisoner, he remembers the concern these Gentiles had for him. Okay, and this goes to the background context of the letter, understanding that the last time Paul had seen these Ephesians, or at least the Ephesian elders, was on Miletus. Remember when in Acts 20, and they departed, and Paul said, I'm not going to see your face again. And they're weeping, right? Remember that? And he goes to Jerusalem after that, and he's put into prison. He's accused of bringing Trophimus, an Ephesian, by the way, into the temple, into the court of Israel. And so it's a false accusation, but they accuse him of that, and so they throw him in jail. He goes to Caesarea, and he's there in prison for 2 years. Then he appeals to Caesar. He goes to Rome. He's there for 2 years. Now, the Ephesians must have heard about the inside story from Trophimus. We're not told this, but this is what I believe, because Trophimus, Acts 27 says, or 21 says he's an Ephesian. I'm certain they came back and said, Paul's been taken prisoner. And they're thinking, our last interaction was Paul a couple years ago. He said he would never see us again. This must be it. He's going to die. He's going to die and be executed for basically bringing us the gospel, because the Jews are mad at him. And so Paul wants them to understand, as he's thinking about the fact that he's a prisoner and remembering they are concerned for him, he says, look, I'm a prisoner for the sake of you Gentiles, and this is a good thing. God has used me to be a minister to Gentiles, and that's why I'm in prison, and that's okay. Verse 13, he says, I'm telling you these things so that you will not lose heart. So verses 2 to 13 are connected to the background context of this letter. And then verse 14, he comes back to his prayer for this reason, and then he gives a prayer. And now we can see too why he wants them to be strengthened, because they're discouraged as well. And he's been trying to encourage them by reminding them of who they are in Christ and what Christ has done, what God has done through Christ. And so he's praying this prayer that they would be strengthened, that they'd be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length, and there's no specific object, so you have to do it, kind of determine that from some other things in the context. But this is what his prayer is, these three things. All right?
Then Pastor Tim, he ends with doxology.
And then, yes, in verse 20 to 21, it's a doxology, which is how he began the letter, directing praise to God. And then chapters 4 to 6 is the application.
Beautiful letter, Pastor Tim.
Any questions, guys, on this? That was a lot of content shoved into a short period of time, but I'll give you these notes, and then I want you to study this diagram, take a look at it, and then as you think about it, I really want you to see the structure as I've sort of highlighted here, because that's what you're going to preach. That's your main outline. Paul's motivation, or he was compelled to pray based on what God has done in Christ, and the content of his prayer are these three things. And then you need to explain what these three things are. To be strengthened in the inner man, to be able to comprehend what is the breadth. Whoops, I misspelled that. What is the breadth? And then to know the love of Christ.
I use this outline one time, Pastor Tim, to point out my main point is that the prayer samples in the Bible, if we will note, okay, seldom are concerned about temporal concerns.
Yeah.
For the most part, our prayer revolves around temporal concerns and urgencies. Paul teaches us a different concern for prayer. It's very, very powerful. Pastor Tim, may I ask, with regards to the third point, and that phrase, that you, should we not include that to end and let you stand alone as the subject instead of that you?
I'm sorry, up here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's he would grant you, I think it's that, and that you is part of the it's not a conjunction or a pronoun here. It's actually functioning, it's introducing a direct object, you. Because you could say it this way. Sometimes it's, he would grant that you be. That's in English, you can say it that way. I told you that you should, eat dinner. Okay, so here that is acting like it's introducing the direct object. What I told you. That he would grant that you. So that word that's a tricky little word in English. So that's what's going on here. That's why I did it this way, that you.
Okay.
Any other questions on this? Okay. I hope that was clear. You'll have the notes. You can examine it more detail on when you have time on your own. I'll give that to you. I guess.
That's
pardon me?
very interesting, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, I'm just I wanted to show you yet another example of these diagrams are intended to show us the structure of a passage. And in that, we can then identify the author's outline. And then from that, of course, can lead us to our outline for our sermon. But we want to follow the main structure that the author has presented. And diagramming for epistles is a very important way to do that. And then, of course, as we've talked about, we can use diagramming in certain parts of narrative where there's instructional teaching. And then we can use in poetry as well, because that is also instructional by nature. It's just includes figurative language and other things, figures of speech, imagery and such, but it's still instructional, still didactic. And so therefore, diagramming can yield some helpful insights. Okay, I want to turn our attention towards the next assignment for narrative here. And that is the next assignment. The first assignment was the background and setting of the, did I not? Oops, sorry.
Background and literary context, Pastor Tim.
Yes, I need to open up that assignment. Give me one moment to find it. I thought I had it open, but I didn't. All right. Yeah, the first assignment was the background and literary context. The second assignment was the character and setting analysis. The third assignment is the scene analysis, all right? And this is, for a narrative, one of the most critical steps. It's kind of like the diagram. It's that important for narrative, okay? Let me just pull up the assignment example, which I will send to you guys here after the session. Can everybody see that? The scene analysis of the story? Okay, this is the third assignment and you're supposed to do this for your Old Testament passage. And it basically here, sorry, that should not be there. You can refer to sessions 6 through 9. This is where we went through the scene analysis together. Also pages 14 to 17 of the teacher's manual. And the steps for the scene analysis, there were basically 3 steps. The first one was to divide the story into its scenes. And to do that, again, remember, look for the change in setting. And we talked a lot about that in session 6 earlier. And then the second step is, after you've identified the scenes, is then to look for these 6 particular aspects in each scene. Identify the setting of that scene, the place, the time. Identify the characters, key characters in that scene, and then note any important dialogue, anything that seems significant. And then the narrator comments. Again, remember, men, I've emphasized many times, this is an important feature. look for what the narrator tells us. He's the one guiding and directing, and what he says is things that he wants us specifically to see. So make sure you don't ignore that. And then fifthly, just compose a one-line summary of the scene. What's the point? And then lastly, if there's any other general comments or observations. And then that's step 2. That's the step that'll take some time. And then step 3 is to basically collect all the summaries for each scene, and then that would tell the story in a few sentences. Okay? So that's the general overview. And again, session 6 through 9, we spent a good amount of time sort of walking through each of those steps and then applying it to John 4. And so what I've done here is essentially put together what we covered with John 4 as an example for you. There's also an example from Luke chapter 4 in Canvas that you can look to, all right? So before we look at that specific example, are there any questions about the steps? I know it was a while ago when we talked about these, but
Pastor Tim, this is for our particular passage, right?
yes. So you'll do this for Ruth 4.
Of assignment.
Yeah. So in your case, it's Ruth chapter 4. So yeah, you're doing the scene analysis just for your chapter. Don't do the whole book. If you want to, you can do the whole book. But right now that your focus is on your particular part of the story, your passage, okay? And as I said, man, if you want to go back, if you've already done this assignment, you're welcome to go back, review it, and modify it so that it's fresh in your mind as you prepare for your sermon. You're welcome to do that and resubmit it if you want to, okay? All right, so any other questions just on the general order of the steps? Okay, all right. So just quickly, I'll just show you the example quickly for John 4. I broke John 4 up into its scenes, and notice the first one I didn't call a scene. It was really an introduction because it was setting, it was providing the setting for the story, okay? So in verses 1 to 6. And then the first scene was in Samaria near Sychar at Jacob's well at a particular time. Then scene 2 was there was a change in characters. The woman that Jesus was talking to left, and the disciples arrived, and they have a conversation. And then scene 3 is another change in characters, where the people of Sychar arrive, and Jesus has a conversation with them. And so I just noted that the scenes are really framed by those changing characters, those 3 different dialogues. All right? And then that's step 1. Step 2 is in now looking at detail in each particular scene. And so I give a summary of the introduction, what the setting is that the author gives, and then notice scene 1, which is verses 7 through 26, I believe. Yes. And notice there that I have, I talk about the setting, the characters, key dialogue, and here I just focus on the key statements, at least as I perceive them. Key narrator comments, the point of the passage. This is my summary sentence from the first scene. And then I have some additional comments that just thoughts that came to my mind, observations as I went through the scene. Okay? So I do that for scene 1. I turn around, do it again for scene 2. The same 6 aspects: setting, characters, dialogue, and here I broke it down into some of the verses. The narrator comments, the summary point, and then additional comments that came to my mind during that analysis. And then I did it for scene 3. Okay? So it's the same process. Identify the scenes, step 1. Step 2, break down each scene into these 6 aspects: setting, characters, dialogue, narrator, summarize the point of the scene, and then additional comments. Okay? And then step 3, I just take those summary statements of each scene and sort of put them together So step 3 really is nothing added. It's just really taking step 2 and summarizing those, putting those main points together. Okay?
So, Pastor Tim, in step 2, we can draw from our observations in assignment 2.
Sure. Yeah.
We can draw informations from there also from based on our observations, no?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah, the idea here is to organize the information so that we're now analyzing. Remember, in an epistle, each paragraph represents a unit of thought. So we were just looking at Ephesians 3, verses 14 to 19. That was one paragraph that focused on Paul's prayer. Really the content of his prayer, what he was praying for them. That's one paragraph. That's a unit of thought. And the entire epistle is broken down into those paragraphs. Well, in a story, it's the scenes that are the unit of thought, so to speak. They're like the paragraph in an epistle. Okay? And that's why I have step 3, where I take the summary statement from each scene and put it together. This is kind of like the paragraph summary. All right? Jesus reveals, and I really could say to the Samaritan woman that he is a Messiah. Then Jesus declares to his disciples the importance, and then finally many Samaritans come to believe. Okay? So that's the idea here, is you're summarizing each of these scenes because these are what make up sort of the author's points. You know, each scene is given to us by the author in order to focus our attention on a particular point. All right? And in this case, the first scene was what Jesus said to the woman. Second scene is what he said to the disciples, who, when they came, remember, they looked and said, what's Jesus talking to that woman for? Remember, that was the problem in the story, the prejudice of the culture. And then the third scene is sort of the fruit of, or the result, the desire that Jesus wanted, what he wanted his disciples to see, and that was that many came to believe, even these Samaritans, who they thought they weren't supposed to talk to. Okay? Now, any questions on this, or any specific questions specific to your passage? Okay, that means no questions, or you're bored, or you're hungry. Okay, if
We are, Pastor Tim, we are quiet because we are overwhelmed.
yeah.
We are overwhelmed by the amazing things we are learning.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Amen. Amen.
Pastor
Amen.
Nor, did you have a question?
Even the location is still the same, but changing character means changing a scene already.
Yeah, if it's like a complete change. Sometimes you'll have a scene where there's a group of people and one more person comes over and he becomes part of that same scene. But other times you'll have a complete change in characters. And in this case, for example, Jesus is still there, but in the first scene, he's talking to the woman. She leaves. The disciples come. Now he's talking to the disciples. So it's in the same location at the same time, or, you know, a little bit after his conversation with the woman. But the difference, why it's a new scene, is because it's now all different characters. And then the same thing happens in the third scene, where the disciples sort of move out of the picture. I think they're still there, but it's these Samaritans come in, and now they're the focus. And then actually there is a change in time and location in that third scene, because it includes they go to Sukar and then they stay there 2 more days. So that third scene is sort of a broader in terms of time. But yeah, so with the characters, sometimes that's a little bit of a judgment call. It's not just any time a new character shows up. It's if there's sort of this change in the characters involved. It could be in the same time and place, but it's a different set of characters that are in that the scene. So that's why I identify these as separate scenes, even though it's the same location and roughly the same time.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, very good question. Any others? Okay, let me just encourage you guys to really get your assignments done. We don't want to, at this point, we don't have any room to get behind anymore. We had room before, but now that there's a vaccine for COVID, you know, I'm going to be there pretty soon, guys. So we need to, you know, you got to be ready for me. So
did Pfizer discover already, Pastor Tim?
well, they're reporting their results are 90% effective in preventing the virus. So they still need to be examined by a third party, and they still need FDA approval, but they're expecting by the end of the year, if things continue as they've shown, that they'll be able to introduce it. So it seems it was actually Pfizer and a German company combined their efforts. But I think they already made like 35 or 45 million vials of the virus. They just sort of took a risk and produced it in the hopes that the test would be good. So they'll be able to start treating people by the end of the year. Not everybody, but they were saying there'll probably be enough by middle of next year to treat the entire country. And so I assume then that'll include, you know, more nations, whatever nations want to use it.
So, Pastor Tim, let me get this right, no? So the vaccine they developed is also for those who have been infected already?
No, it's
or it is for those it is for prevention